Welcome back, everyone, to Scholar Hermetica. Today we'll explore some of the fundamental aspects of classical Hermetic cosmology. And this is classical Hermetic cosmology, so we are looking back at what disciples of the Hermetic tradition would have believed and taught roughly 1700 years ago. So there won't be any Kabbalah or Rosicrucian concepts here. Rather, we'll look at what the worldview held by Greco-Egyptians in areas like Alexandria, drawing from both the established Hermetic texts and the Greek magical papyri, which were contemporary to most of the texts of the Hermetica. Sometimes the Hermetic works are looked at in isolation or in relationship with contemporary Jewish and Christian literature, but it's almost a new phenomenon that scholars are starting to study the Hermetic works in the context of Hellenistic and Roman Egypt. Indeed, there are a number of works in the Greek magical papyri that refer to Hermes in a manner reminiscent of his portrayal in the Hermetica, and there also seems to be a common cosmological or even theological worldview between these two sets of texts that shows that the early Hermetists were drawing their knowledge from the common well springs of wider Hellenistic Egyptian culture. So, to begin, Hermetism taught a holistic view of the universe that can variously be described as pantheism or monism. These are modern terms, and the subtle difference between these terms would probably not have interested Hermetic disciples of the classical period. Depending on which Hermetic text one is reading, there's also a difference in emphasis on whether the Hermetists held a view of priority monism, wherein there is an emphasis on the singleness of reality, that all existent things are extensions of a single essential being, i.e., God, or dual aspect monism, wherein there is an outward difference between spirit and matter, but fundamentally these are just two aspects of a common singularity. The Hermetists clearly didn't split hairs over differences in nuance of this sort. Likewise, they certainly didn't fit into neat categories used by Christian and post Christian scholarship today, like monotheism, polytheism. They clearly accepted the existence of a single divine reality that, for all intents and purposes, is understood as God, and is sometimes understood to be the only thing properly to be referred to as God or divine, and yet there was an acceptance in the reality of a multiplicity of spiritual beings, ranging from gods to angels to daemons to the souls of living creatures. It also seems to vary from text to text whether these gods are to be understood as wholly autonomous entities in themselves, no different from human souls, or if, like the view held by the Neoplatonists, as we saw in my video on the theology of Emperor Julian, the various gods and spirits were to be understood as mere aspects of the singular Godhead and not wholly independent in themselves. There was probably never a clear consensus amongst the Hermetists themselves, just as there wasn't among pagans at large, but to call them monotheistic would seem both inaccurate and perhaps anachronistic. But to call their views polytheistic would seem too general. Terms like monotheistic, polytheistic, pantheistic, monistic, dual theistic, and the like are largely the perspective of scholars from a historically Christian culture on the outside looking in. So, in this video, I'd like to present some of the general aspects of the Hermetic worldview, but without scrutinizing too closely how one should interpret the meanings behind the mythos. Certainly, much of this was to be taken more or less literally, while some of it figuratively, and most of it somewhere between the two extremes. To begin, in Hermetic cosmology, there is a single divine essence that underlies all existence, hyparxis. The one is the eternal, ion, and it first manifests itself as the divine light, phos, and this light itself is the essence of life, zoe. The light separates itself from the darkness, or dross, which is frequently understood as the abyss, and is sometimes described as a moist nature or like a wet sand. This is the origin of the material that the light will infuse in order to produce the living cosmos. From the light is born the mind, or nous. This is the living God, the Father of all. The Father is the mind of the light itself. As the light separated itself to a height, and perhaps what is meant by this is a higher frequency of energetic vibration, it caused the various elements to separate from the primordial chaos, in which all potentialities latently existed in an undifferentiated, lightless, and lifeless mass. And yet it was simultaneously a void. The elements ascended based upon their lightness. Thus, fire followed close behind light, and the air followed fire, and the earth was at first left behind, mixed with the water. From out of the Father Mind arose several emanations, the two most important of which are the Demiurge, also known as the Second Mind, and this is the artificer of the universe. Along with this was the Logos, the Divine Reason, which is the aspect of the Godhead responsible for producing and maintaining a rational structure to the universe. It is that part of God which informs all subsequent being. If we were also to delve into some of the Gnostic material, we can add Pronoia, divine forethought, who is born with mind as the initial female aspect and is essentially the first sense of conscious self-reflection of the Godhead, from which the Logos would essentially be born out from her union with mind. We might also translate Nous and Pronoia as consciousness and divine thought, respectively. Then there is Sophia, the female counterpart of the Logos. As the role of the Logos is to stream forward or outward to inform the elements of the Father's will, Sophia, or Divine Wisdom's, role is to maintain the bonds between the things produced by this stream of reason. She interlocks all things back to the Father himself. From the higher elements, the Demiurge produced 7 governors, or administrators, Dioikitai. These beings would lend their energies to the creation and maintenance of the cosmos. Now, some say these 7 are the planets, and in some texts they are clearly named as such, with the names for the gods associated with each of the planets. However, there are other texts that are much more obscure, and we might also consider the view that the planets of the sky are not themselves these gods, but rather manifestations or symbols of their power that act as portals for them to interact with this created world. In this case, the physical planets may or may not be spiritual beings in and of themselves. As to the identity of the 7 governors, or 7 realities, we may turn to the cosmogonic section of the book known as the 8th Book of Moses, as found in the Greek magical papyri. The author of this text claims in his introduction that Hermes stole this information from Moses, and not the other way around. This indicates that we have a Jewish author who, as was common in that period, wanted to lay claim to a Greco-Egyptian work by claiming it as a work of Moses plagiarized by pagans. Here, the creation of the 7 principles is told through a mythic allegory, wherein each entity is the result of a sound made from the mouth of God. This is related to how the Logos is not only the rational component of God, but also understood literally as his word or speech. Ultimately, this derives from ancient Egyptian theology, wherein the creator Ptah brings about creation through his aspects Sia, intellect or thought, which gives rise to Hu, utterance, which is the spoken or rationalized creative design that streams ever out from the mouth of God, and is born from his own divine intellect, Sia in Egyptian and Nous in Greek. Thus, in the 8th Book of Moses, God brings about the existence of the 7 through laughter. This laughter is probably to be understood as equivalent to the Logos in the Poimandres and other related works. Each of the 7 laughs produces its own living power. Some of these powers are identical or near identical to aspects of creation that preceded the formation of the 7 governors in the Poimandres. But the difference in sequence may be irrelevant since the Poimandres itself is obscure concerning the 7 governors. From the first laugh arose Phos Auge, or light radiance, who irradiated everything with light and became the god over the whole cosmos and of fire. This description would seem to give the impression that he may be identical with the demiurge of Poimandres, who is also the god of the fire. I would speculate that the Egyptian origin for this figure is the sun god Re, who is also frequently described as the first being to come into existence, either as God himself or as the first emanation of the divine, and then established as the Lord of all. The second laugh caused the earth element to heave, apparently from out of the watery abyss, and split the primordial waters into 3 parts. A god appeared who holds dominion over the primal waters of the abyss. The text does not give him a clear name, only the ritualistic titles to be chanted as part of the spell text of the 8th Book of Moses, and these magical names are Escaleo and Promsaka Aleeo. The third laugh generated nous, or mind, which is also called phrenes, which refers to the seat of emotions as well as intellect. It can likewise be translated as mind or even wit, but more refers to the heart as a center of personal drive, and indeed this god appears holding a heart in his hand. Because of the sharpness of intellect of this god, he is also called Hermes and given the title Semesilam, meaning eternal sun, in the West Semitic dialects. He is given charge over the power of understanding by which all things are managed. Here we see that the nous is understood as Hermes himself rather than God, though we must consider that there were possibly some Hermetists who saw Hermes as a manifestation of the divine mind itself. This figure, who is both the intellect and the heart of the Godhead, is probably derived from the Egyptian deity Sia, who is both the heart and the intellectual property of Ptah. Both divine speech, Hu, and intellect, Sia, are associated with Tot in Egyptian religion, and Tot appears frequently alongside Re in the creation stories, either just after him or somehow present just before him. Very possibly, then, the figures given so far may have originally referred to Re, Nun, which is the watery abyss, and Tot. The being who appeared from the fourth laugh is Gena, the generative principle, and with Gena comes Spora, procreation. This refers to the power bestowed by God on created souls to self-perpetuate themselves, so that they do not need to be continuously regenerated anew, but can advance themselves. This will be mentioned more later when we look into the mythology of the Kore Kosmou. The fifth laugh was a gloomy laugh, and from it appeared Moira, or Fate. She appears holding scales of judgment. However, Hermes contests that justice should be in his domain. God intervenes and declares that justice will depend on both of them together, but all things of the world will be subjected to fate. Fate is also mentioned as being the first to bear the scepter of world rulership. On the one hand, the figure of Fate, with her scales of judgment, and her relationship to Tot Hermes as the judge of souls, would indicate that this is really the Egyptian figure Ma'at, who likewise is the manifestation of justice, law, and world order. It is also likely that she is to be equated with the Greek figure of Themis, divine law, who appears in the Hermetica. She may also be identified with the goddess Seshat, the goddess of scribes, and writing, who is the female counterpart of Tot and variously said to be his daughter, wife, or sister. And on the other hand, if we observe the description of this goddess and her name Moira or Fate, she may also be meant to portray the moon goddess, who frequently appears in other texts of the Greek magical papyri, who is largely based on the goddess Hecate. See my video on 3 prayers from the Greek magical papyri that I will have linked in the description. The sixth laugh produces Kairos, or time. This laugh was a happy laugh, and Kairos appears bearing a scepter of kingship, which he hands over to the first generated god, Phos Auge. For this gift, Phos declares that because Kairos has wrapped himself in the glory of the light, all things shall be made subject to him. After wrapping himself in light's glory, the character of the light produces a certain effluence. After this, the god Light says to the moon, which may possibly be Moira if she is to be identified with Hecate, that because she has wrapped herself in the effluence of the light, she will encompass all things along with time himself. Her waxing and waning will be a sign of the increasing and decreasing of all things in time. The seventh laugh produces Psyche or soul. This is less an entity and more of a reference to the animating force imbued into the cosmos. Indeed, God says of soul, "You will move all things, and all things shall be made glad so long as Hermes guides you." With this, all things were unrestrainedly filled with spirit. The text becomes a bit strange from this point, as God then makes 3 popping sounds which terrifies all things and causes the deity Phobos or fear to appear. Seeing this, God lets out a hiss which caused the earth to open up, and the earth received the echo of this sound. From the earth then was born the Pythian serpent who, because of the hiss that is received from God, foreknew all things. The earth, or the lower elements, then began to heave and raise higher and higher, but the pole of the heavens remained the same. Before they could collide, God said, "Iao," and a great supreme deity appeared. This deity established all the elements and realities in their places, and hence they have remained since before creation. Fear challenged this being on the basis of having come into being prior to him. Iao, however, was given precedence not only over fear, but also over all 9 gods and dominion over creation. However, he was apparently united in some manner with fear, or at least made co-equal with him, as their magical names are then combined as Danup, Krator Berbali Balbith Iao. Now, this figure named Yao is probably none other than the mystical entity called Abraxas. And if you've seen my video on solar religion in the Roman Empire, you'll know that this strange figure represents the solar genius of the created cosmos. He is both an emanation and a representative of God himself, who is the deity ruling over celestial harmony and order. He is also equated to the various sun gods of the Roman Empire: Mithras, Helios, Re, Sol Invictus, Apollo, and in this case he is probably meant to represent Horus as the god of order who maintains an eternal struggle against Set, god of disorder, who is probably the basis of the figure of fear in this myth. Now that we have some idea of who the seven governors may have been, we will turn and look at Book 3 of the Corpus Hermeticum, called The Sacred Sermon of Hermes. This text gives a creation story similar to that found in the Poimandres, but greatly summarized. And where the Poimandres' central focus is on the coming of the Anthropos, or archetypal human being, into the realm of matter, the Sacred Sermon focuses more on the gods, particularly the astral gods and their participation in the ordering of the elements and creation of the cosmos. The whole text is no more than a page in length, so I will quote it in full using my own translation. The beginning of the realities is God, as well as mind, nature, and matter. Well, God is the wisdom for the revelation of all things. Divinity is the beginning, as well as nature, energy, necessity, perfection, and renewal. For there was an infinite darkness in the abyss, and water, and a subtle intelligent spirit. They were in chaos by a divine power. Then a holy light was sent upwards, and the elements solidified out of the watery essence under the sand, and all the gods divided up the germinate seeds of nature. While all things were yet undefined and unwrought, the light elements were set apart unto a height, and the heavy elements were grounded upon the moist sand. The whole of them delineated by fire and raised aloft, to be carried by spirit. And the heaven was seen in 7 circles, and the gods became visible in the shapes of the stars, with all their signs. And heaven was assembled with the gods within it, and the periphery rotated by the air, with a circular course carried by the divine spirit. Each god, through his own power, sent forth what had been appointed to him, and the 4-footed beasts were brought forth, and creeping things, and aquatic animals, and birds, and every ingerminate seed and grass, and the shoot of every flower. These bore within themselves the seeds of their own regeneration. The gods also sowed the generations of men to have knowledge of divine works, and efficient testimony of nature, and for the multiplication of the human race, and lordship over all those under heaven, and for the recognition of what things are good for increasing in their increasement, and multiplying in their multitudes. And every incarnate soul, through the portentous course of the encircling gods, was sown for the observation of heaven. The course of the heavenly gods, divine works, and the activity of nature, and for the signs of those things that are good, for knowledge of divine power, and to know the whirling fate of those who are fair and those who are foul, and to discover all the skillful works of those who are good. This is the beginning of their living and their becoming wise according to their fate from the course of the encircling gods, and to be resolved into what they will become, leaving behind great monuments of their technical skills upon the earth, which will dim in fame over time, and every generation of ensouled flesh, and of the seed of the fruit, and of every technical work that is diminished, will be renewed by necessity, and by renewal from the gods, and by the course of nature's measured cycle. For the divine is all a cosmic commixture that is renewed by nature, for nature has also been established in the divine. The Sacred Sermon is a fine summation of the Hermetic creation mythology, but if we would like to know the details of the creation story in full, especially the creation of souls and the establishment of the human race, then we must turn to Book 1 of the set of works called the Kore Kosmou, which are typically labeled as Books 23 to 25 of the Stobaean Hermetica. That is, those Hermetic tracts preserved for us in the works of John Stobaeus, a cataloger of classical wisdom who lived around the 5th century. The Kore Kosmou presents a dialogue between the goddess Isis and her son Horus, wherein Isis, as the disciple of Hermes, explains the creation of souls to Horus. I will hopefully get around to doing a video just on the Kore Kosmou someday, so I won't go into too much detail of the overall work here. Instead, our focus will be on the mythology about how souls were first created and came to be instilled in human bodies. I will quote the text somewhat liberally and through my own translation. Quoting from the text, "Until the architect of all things willed it not to be so, ignorance held sway over all things, but when he decided to reveal himself for who he is, he breathed loving affections into the gods, and he bestowed unto their thoughts that splendor which he held within his breast, so that first they might wish to seek, then to find, and then be able to succeed. This could not occur in a mortal seed, for none existed yet, but in a soul who has a sympathy with the heavenly mysteries, and this was all-knowing Hermes. He also saw all things, and having seen, he understood, and having understood, he had the strength to disclose and divulge it. And what he understood, he inscribed, and what he inscribed, he hid. He kept steadfastly quiet about most of this, when he talked, so that every future born generation of the cosmos might inquire into these things. And so he ascended unto the stars to attend the gods, his kin." Hermes said, "But when dawn had come, I beheld with all-seeing eyes those formless mysteries of the dawn. Then it slowly shadowed over me, the precise discernment came. He hid away the holy symbols of the cosmic elements near to the secret objects of Osiris, and casting a spell, speaking these very words, he departed into heaven. For he thusly declared, O sacred books, who have been fashioned by mine imperishable hands, with an overpowering concoction of whirling incorruptibility, remain undecayed through all eternity and incorruptible throughout the seasons, becoming unseen and undiscovered by all who are destined to pass across the plains of this earth, until heaven in his old age should father compositions worthy of you, that the craftsman is called souls." Having said these things over the books and enchanting his own works, he passed into the sacred precincts of his own zones. After the books were hidden away, the sufficiently long intermediate time period was idle, and nature happened to be barren until those who were already ordered to go round the heaven came before their king, the god of all things, to report the inactivity of the realities, and that it is necessary to arrange all things, and that it is a work for no other but himself. And they said, "We beseech thee to consider thoroughly the present realities and their future needs." When they had said these things, God smiled and said, "Let nature be." And from his voice a most beautiful female being came forth, and the gods who beheld her were awestruck. And God, the forefather, honored her with the name Nature, and bade her to be prolific. Furthermore, fixing his gaze upon the ambient, he proclaimed, "Let the heaven, the air, and the ether be filled with all things." God spoke, and it was so. And Nature, speaking to herself, knew that it would not be right for her to disobey her father's commandment. Coupling with labor, she produced a beautiful daughter whom she called Invention, and God bestowed being upon her, and having granted this, he separated those beings who had already come to be, filled them with the mysteries, and bestowed the leadership over them to Invention. No longer did God will that the upper cosmos be inactive, but resolved to fill it full of spirits, so that those throughout that part of the cosmos should not remain unmoved and inactive. Thus, he began using sacred essences as constructs toward the generation of his own work. For he took as much spirit from his own self as was sufficient, and mixing it with intelligent fire, blended it with some other unknown materials, and united these, each one to another, with secret incantations. He thus stirred up the whole composition very well, until some very subtle material in the mixture sparkled up, that was both purer and rather clearer than those from which it had been produced. It was itself transparent. Indeed, the architect alone could see it. Now, to break off the quotation here, where the text says that the concoction sparkled up, the Greek term literally means to laugh. So here we have something comparable to the myth found in the 8th book of Moses, only here it is not God himself who is portrayed as laughing, but rather the material for the creation of souls which he has constructed. It may specifically be related to the creation of soul in the 8th book of Moses, wherein the text says that all was made glad and became moved with the coming into being of soul. Returning to the text, since the concoction was from fire, it neither melted when heated, nor, because it was made perfect from spirit, did it become cool, but it had the blend's specific composition, a certain unique, proper, and peculiar aggregation. Indeed, God called this composition animation, or animatrix. The Greek term is psychosis, but has nothing to do with the current meaning of that term in English. He named it animation both because it was a very auspicious name and it was in accord with the similitude of its energy or activity. Now, out of this coagulation, he wrought considerable myriads of souls, orderly and measuredly molding the efflorescence from his blend towards that which he wished it to be, with experience and precise reasoning, as there was no need for these souls to differ much from each other. Since the efflorescence that was expelled as vapor from God's movement was not equal in itself, but the first efflorescence was greater, fuller, and purer in every way than the second, and the second was considerably lesser than the first by as much as it was greater than the third, and thus the whole number of souls was finished at 60 grades. Despite this, God ordered all the souls to be eternal, making it law, since they are from one essence which he alone knew how to perfect, and he appointed unto them divisions between the signs of the zodiac, and dispensations in nature's upper heights of heaven, so that they might revolve the cylindrical axis in a certain order and a fitting arrangement, and thus please their Father. Now, to break from the text for a moment, the reference to 60 gradations is explained further in the 3rd book of the Kore Kosmou, where it is explained that the mediating region of the air is separated into 4 divisions and 60 strata. Each home to a different grade of souls, each soul dwells in the stratum proper to its nature. All souls are the same constitution, but not of the same rank. For the souls of each stratum surpass those in the stratum beneath theirs by the same degree to which they are surpassed by those above them. The first division is made up of 4 strata and occupies the space from the ground to the peak of the hills and ridges. The second division is of 8 strata and is the place where air currents or winds arise. This is also the region where birds fly. Beyond this, the air cannot sustain life forms. The air, or perhaps rather souls, in this region can cycle through all 8 strata and even descend to the 4 strata in the division beneath theirs, but those of the first division cannot ascend freely to the second. The third division contains 16 strata and is full of air that is subtle and pure. The fourth division contains 32 strata and is composed of the subtlest, purest, and most translucent air. The upper limits of this region are the fiery or imperial heaven, which divides the celestial from the supercelestial realms. All strata are arranged in a straight line from the earth to the heavens and possess 4 divisions and 12 intermediate divisions, which possibly refers to the 12 winds of traditional Greek thought. Returning to the text, so then, standing within the pervasive beauty of the ether, he summoned the natures of the realities forthwith, so to tell them, Ye souls, beautiful children of my spirit and my careful thought, whom I have brought to birth with mine own hands, and I now consecrate for my cosmos, hearken to my words as they were laws, and touch no other place except that which has been assigned to you by my volition. For those of you who stay in place, heaven too will remain likewise, as well as your assigned constellation and thrones filled with virtue. But if ye attempt any deviation against my decrees, I swear to you by my Holy Spirit and by the blend from which I brought you forth, and by these my soul-creating hands, that I shall quickly forge for you a chain and chastisements. Having said these things, God mixed the remainder of the elements with those of like kind, water and earth, and likewise proclaiming some secret words, words that were powerful but not like the first. Stirring them well and breathing vitality into the blend, he took the coagulant that was produced, which also floated to the top like the other coagulation, and from this he sculpted the human-shaped signs of the zodiac. The remainder of the mixture he gave to those souls who had already advanced into the regions of the gods, and into the places near the stars, and speaking unto the sacred daemons who had been summoned, O my children, born of mine own nature, mold this. Accept the remnants of mine art, and let each soul mold something in resemblance of their own nature. I shall provide for you these models. And taking the zodiac ably and beautifully, he arranged the cosmos concordantly with the movements of the souls. In addition to the human-shaped signs of the zodiac, he fitted the animal signs in order and bestowed upon them the all-devising powers and the all-inventing spirit generative of all future things in general that will forever be. And he departed, promising to yoke his invisible spirit to their visible works, and promised to each an essence of like generation, so that they would engender other beings alike unto themselves. Indeed, they would have no further need to make any other thing beyond what they had first wrought. They took what had been blended of the material, first considering the Father's blend, revering it, and then inquired into what it was composed of, but they could not discover this easily, and because they had now inquired into this, they subsequently feared they might succumb to the Father's wrath, and turn to perform his commands. Then, from the uppermost material that had an excess of light coagulant, they formed the race of birds. But in this work, the blend now became semi-coagulated and presently took on a solid congelation, from which they molded the race of four-footed beasts, who were not so light. And they formed the race of fishes, who needed another watery essence for swimming. From the remnant that was cold as well as heavy, the souls wrought the nature of the reptiles. As they set to work, they also armed themselves with an overly curious daring, and they did things against their orders. Furthermore, they quit their own divisions and distributions and no longer wished to remain in one place, but were ever agitated, and considered remaining in one station any longer to be death. This is what Hermes said: that which the souls had performed had not escaped the Lord and God of all things. He sought out a chastisement and a binding spell for them that they would miserably endure. Thus, it was decided by the leader and master of all things to construct the composite form of human beings, so that, in this way, the race of souls would be continually punished. To summarize the rest of the tale without quoting the text, Hermes was given the task of producing human bodies, and each of the celestial gods provided something that would be a benefit to the human race. Hermes then demands the remaining soul mixture be given to him from the souls who have misused it, but finds that it has been entirely dried up. He refreshes it by adding an excess of water. This resulted in a material wholly dissolvable, weak, and powerless. This was so that humanity might not enjoy the fullness of power. Nonetheless, what Hermes created was beautiful, and he commanded the souls to become embodied. The souls lamented their punishment with wailing and shrieking, and petitioned the Father to moderate their punishment, so that each would receive a punishment according to their merits. Rewards and punishments would then be meted out both through reincarnation and through the placement of the soul after its bodily death in an afterlife. Even those who were to be punished by reincarnation through animals were ranked. Every incarnation was designed to give the soul a chance to learn, experience, and grow according to what it lacked or what sins it had performed in the past. Despite God bestowing all the blessings of the ordered cosmos upon the earth, the souls initially lived in ignorance. They refused to honor the gods. Indeed, they considered themselves equal to the gods, and they were everywhere in revolt. The strong abused and murdered the weak. They desecrated shrines, using them as dumping grounds for the bodies of the slain, and polluted the very elements themselves with carnage. The elements cried out to God to deliver laws unto mankind that would end the ignorance, violence, and desecration. God then sent Osiris and Isis to mankind to govern them and establish laws. They brought about order and civilization, and they brought an end to the savagery. They taught mankind sacred mysteries, and they consecrated rites and temples in honor of the gods. Osiris and Isis learned the mysteries of the cosmos from Hermes himself, and inscribed this knowledge onto stelae, and taught their disciples to do likewise. They produced remedies for the easement of human life, medicines for the body, and they established the line of prophets or seers who could communicate with the gods so that the souls of humanity might never fall back into ignorance. Turning to Book 4 of the Corpus Hermeticum, known as the Monad or the Mixing Bowl, we learn that although God has granted all humans the gift of reason, that is, logos, which may also be rendered speech, God has not granted the gift of mind or intellect to all of humanity. Rather, God has, as it were, filled a great mixing bowl with the intellect, and humanity is called to immerse themselves in it, if they are able, and in doing so, humans can learn either how to ascend to God, or at least why they have come into incarnation. Those who have heeded the call have gained knowledge and become perfect, whereas those who do not heed the call to immerse themselves in the gift of intellect are no better than irrational animals, being inflamed with passions, being willful and wrathful, and are slaves to the appetites of the body, with which they identify themselves. The true path to spiritual mortality comes from living by intellect. In this text, Tot asks Hermes how one might become immersed in intellect. Hermes instructs him that to love oneself, one must first hate the body. This is an oft misunderstood statement of the Hermetica. Hermes is almost certainly not advocating something like radical asceticism. Rather, it is to see the body as something other than the true self, which is the soul that animates it. The body is a mortal thing, and hence a thing that will wither and die. The would-be sage must come to see the body as a tool and nothing more. He must recognize the difference between the body's appetites from the needs of the true self, and avoid becoming enslaved to the body's appetites. Hermes teaches Tot that because God is faultless, our evils are the fault of ourselves when we allow ourselves to drift away from the good. However, Hermes recognizes that the path toward spiritual enlightenment cannot be attained in one lifetime, but takes many lifetimes, passing through many bodies and the various choirs of daemons and the courses of the stars before we again behold the one supreme good. Evil is more visible to us than the good, because the good, being perfect and incorporeal and divine, has no form or figure. This causes us to disbelieve in God. This is why we must come to hate the body and corporeal appearance, for it distracts us and misleads us from the path toward God. However, as long as we hold on to the understanding that God is the beginning of all things, and is himself without beginning, he is the self-contained monad, the power from which all else must derive numerically, and appearances, though deceiving, could not exist if they were not a reflection of something higher and invisible, which imparts the nature of form, structure, and order onto them. To observe this and hold this mental image in the eyes of the heart is the pathway to knowledge, and from knowledge to that which is to be known, namely God. In this way, the souls, trapped within matter, and made in mirror image to the gods themselves, and of like substance, can find their way not only back to the regions of astral light, from whence they came, but even ascend higher than this, back into the fullness of God's living light.